Welcome to the Student Housing Matters podcast. I'm Alton Irwin, and I'm Chief Marketing Officer here at COCM. And during the month of May, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary here at COCM. And during this month, we're doing something called Looking Back at the Early Days of COCM. And today, I'm excited to have three very long-time employees of COCM: Doug Brown, our president and the founder of COCM; Michelle Smith, our Regional Vice President; and Masha Sapper, our Senior Vice President for Business Systems. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So let's kick this off with talking about when and how you came to COCM. Masha, why don't you kick it off for us?
Sure. So I was working at Old Dominion University at the time at a community called University Village, and had the opportunity to work with Sandy Hill when she had been with that company. And she called me one day and said, "So how comfortable are you where you are?" And I said, I'm good. And she said, "Would you care to look at some other options?" And I said, "Always." So she had me fly down to Birmingham for an interview, and in the airport on my way back, she called me and said, "So what do you think?" And that's kind of where that went. Took a few weeks to kind of figure out all the details, and I think Michelle will tell part of that story maybe. But yeah, that's how I came aboard. It's been almost 20 years now.
So Alton, I'll give you a little bit more of that story. So Sandy actually called me as well and said, "Hey, got this opportunity and I'd like to talk to you." Did the same thing, flew me down to Birmingham. But in that conversation, she also said, "I'd like to get Masha too." And I was like, "Great, yeah." And I said, "But you got to hang on." And this was, I think, like in September-ish or so. And I said, "But you got to hang on. Let me keep Masha through the winter break." And she's like, sure, okay. And then the next thing I know, Masha's saying, "Hey, I'm leaving." And it was not the winter break. It was like a month and a half before. So it's like the end of October. And I called Sandy. I was like, "What's up with this?" And she's like, "Well," I was like, "I'm not talking to you anymore." So for like the next month and a half, Sandy, we had already agreed I was coming aboard, but I wanted to wait for that company to, get them through the holidays and everything. But I didn't talk to Sandy for that month and a half, and she kept calling me. She's like, "Are you talking to me now?" "No, I'm not talking to you now." So that's kind of how this started. So yeah, Masha jumped in, I think, in December, and then I came in January.
Yeah, I had also made Sandy promise that we wouldn't leave Michelle behind, and she gave me a look like, "Who do you think I am?"
Oh, and then of course, Doug brought Sandy in. So Doug, you can tell that story.
Yeah, it was a real domino. Actually, what you all might not know is Sandy and I plotted for a good while and said, what we need is talent, and we need really smart people. And we set out to figure out the smartest people from the company we all had left. And it just kind of went from there. I came in July of 2003. At the time, we had 3 accounts, and they were pretty troubled from a management perspective. And I'd learned very quickly that we needed talent, and we needed it quickly, because we were beginning to start seeing a growth in the P3 environment, and we wanted to take advantage of that growth and manage from a slightly different perspective than most of our competitors were managing. And that is to truly focus on understanding higher education, understanding partnerships, understanding stakeholders on campus. And because I spent 20 years as a university administrator, it was real apparent that we needed to develop a different kind of company.
Well, Doug, you have to include the story that I've heard many times over the years about your initial discussion with Mike Moran about management. Tell that story.
Yeah. Well, you have to understand that, again, we only had 3 accounts, and they had previously lost 2. There was a notion, and not just of Capstone, but a lot of the companies, was that if you could manage off campus, you could manage on campus. It was just management. What's the difference? Because they're all students, and they're all living together in a student purpose product. And there's a profound difference in how you join a university family at the table when you're not always welcomed in some cases. But the discussion you're referring to was a conversation I had with Mike Moran just after leaving my previous company. And, he talked a great deal about management and, how difficult it was to get along with the universities and get them to cooperate and so on. And one of the things that occurred to me when I was at the other company with Sandy was that we saw how management can help sell development, how we were able to speak the language of the folks at the other side of the table and talk about not just developing a product or who's going to own it or how it's going to be financed, but who's going to be there in the long run and who's going to partner with the institution, in the day-to-day activities of managing a student housing program on campus. And I think to his surprise, as well as many others, we began to team up with the development team to go out and really focus on selling the whole package and the advantage of the whole package, not the least of which certainly is management. And because we are there when everyone else goes home in the development world. And we needed to really help universities understand that we weren't going to use an off-campus approach and we weren't going to use a one-shoe-fits-all approach. As a matter of fact, one of the things that emerged from sort of those early days was something we call the matrix of responsibility, which really helped to understand and clarify the roles that everybody played on campus in interacting with the P3. That matrix of responsibility is in most management contracts today, not just by ours, but on many of the other folks that manage. It's become a tool to really help people understand how a P3 play the role it plays in working with an existing housing program or an existing student affairs program.
So let's talk about earliest memories. If somebody asked you, if you were at a cocktail party or whatever, and somebody just said, tell me about your earliest memories at COCM, just real quickly, what comes to your mind? What's the foremost of your thinking about the early days of COCM?
Well, I can just say what I think of Masha, because she laid out sort of the chain of events and how we were capturing people to become part of this team. And I remember the night that Masha accepted the role. She held out on us a good while, but when she accepted, we were at a hotel in Colorado Springs at a national conference. And the reason I remember it very clearly was because we were certainly talking to her on the phone and we were trying to negotiate the details. And the next morning we came down to get our car and they said they couldn't find it. It wasn't in the garage. And the attendant asked Sandy, what color is it? She said, I don't know. And I said, well, he said, well, what's the make and model? She said, I don't know. We got off the airport, we took the car, we went to the hotel. It was late at night. And as it turns out, the night attendant took the keys home, so they couldn't find the car. And they shuttled us around everywhere we wanted to go for that day. And finally, they discovered the keys with the attendant who worked the night shift and found the car. So that's a memory relating to the linkage with Masha.
Yeah, I remember some of those conversations and Sandy saying, if you were with us, you could be in Colorado Springs now too. And I said, okay, I'll take you up on that. And I've still never been to Colorado Springs.
And remember, I wasn't talking to anybody, so.
No, she really wasn't.
No, for me, really the early days of after we all got there and really got things started, it was Doug and Sandy being gone from the home office all the time in the attempt of getting new business. Masha was at a site and I was in the home office all by myself trying to figure out how to, start this company and, operations and all those sorts of things. So, initially I'd say the first 6 months or so, we were really getting this company up and running via telephone. What do you want to do? How do you want to do it? And that's really how we had a lot of our meetings, was just via telephone and, in those days, fax. So we had a couple faxes going back and forth. So those are probably some of my earlier memories, was being in the home office a alone.
Well, it's
I
interesting.
guess my
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think one of my most visual memories is of the first time we got all the directors together in those early days was at the Pier 8 Hotel in Baltimore because, well, most everybody was in Baltimore at the time or thereabouts. And I remember everybody fit into a minivan. And now I don't think we could even fit the leadership team into a minivan anymore.
Nope, you're right. First meeting was at a local, I feel like it was a Cuban restaurant, and we were sitting there having Cuban sandwiches and a couple of drinks just around a bar area, and there's like 5 of us, and that was the start of the company.
Well, I was going to say, I remember Doug was next door to me when he first came on, and I remember as I would walk down the hall, there would always be someone new in an office, and I was always amazed. It was Sandy, then it was Michelle, and it's like, wow, you guys are eating up all the office space here. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say, we also were challenged on those early days because I was the only male in the company. We worried about how do we recruit some men. We wanted to balance out the employee base, and so we really had at the time a pretty unusual company in that our talent was by and large female.
Well, Doug, you mentioned the responsibility matrix. What are some significant accomplishments that you all have been involved with over the years?
I think taking over projects that other people developed and managed was probably sort of the best opportunity we had to really get off the ground, because we walked into projects that were developed but didn't succeed at the beginning, which, as you know, really challenges a project like this down the road if it's missing the first few years of performance. We sort of learned a lot of the lessons about how to integrate ourselves with the universities during that time. We were really blessed to be able to get owners to believe in our abilities because they had been through maybe 1 or 2 pretty bad years with another management company, most of which are out of business today. So I think that experience was important. I think the challenges that we faced was we found ourselves growing faster than we could hire quality people. And we had to learn that lesson too, that fast is not always better relative to getting somebody on board. And we began to sort of develop a culture, if you will. People that work together closely and are, have like value systems really do collect other folks that have the same kind of value systems. And over the years, we just had tremendous employees that have come, from people recruiting each other internally, their friends and other professionals and so on. So that's pretty fun. The other thing I will say is that Michelle was right. We were running constantly and not really had time to stop and think. I think that would have been a deterrent if we had, because we just had to go and make it work. And if you can imagine just the few of us, and now over 700 employees, you're talking about 3,500 beds or 1,000 beds, and and just a tremendous amount of growth just from that beginning, which did not look all that promising if you stepped back at it and looked at it, but it's turned into something pretty amazing.
Masha, Michelle?
I think for me was just the growth. We sat down, Doug, Sandy, and I initially, and Doug's like, what are your 3 goals? Each person give your 3 goals. And I'll tell you, Alton, we weren't in a room that was probably no bigger than a janitor's closet when we sat down and had this meeting. And, one of the things that I distinctly remember was that we wanted to double in size in the first year. And, you think, you only have 3 properties. What's the big deal, right? Oh my gosh. When we said double in size, it wasn't necessarily to go across the country and do that, which is what we did. We pretty much went all the way up in the Northwest down to the Southeast. And it was like, what the heck were we thinking? Well, that was just like Doug said, we weren't. We were just going. So I think when you look at the bed count, that first year we had roughly 2,200 beds or so. And then within 3 to 4 years, we were up around 9,000. And I think year 5, we eclipsed the 10,000 mark. So, I mean, and you think about that 5 years and you multiplied exponentially. And as you said, the employee base wasn't there either. So that was quite interesting. So it made for some interesting conversations and interesting travel and a lot of policies being made.
Yeah, I remember just how as we were trying to hire those people, the immense pressure to get those people into those positions. But I really appreciated that there was a willingness to have conversations about hiring to fill a space versus just hiring the right person for that job. I was trying to fill the director position at the main campus that I was supervising at the time, which was 1,300 of our 2,200 beds. So it was a pretty big deal. And I remember one time Doug on the phone with me saying, Masha, just hire somebody. And I said, I'm not hiring someone who's not the right fit. And it took us about 4 months to get to the right candidate, because back then there was a real stigma to working for a public-private partnership and not working directly for a college or university. And it was really hard to find a person who could overcome that. And I think once we got that person in the door and everybody saw what she was able to do, I think it was very clear that we had waited just long enough for the right person. So I was glad Doug gave me that room to do that.
Yeah,
And, it's funny,
Masha doesn't take direction well. I just wanted to let you know that.
Well,
what's funny about Masha, if you think about it, back then we were called the dark side. Private housing was called the dark side. And I say that because I remember Sandy and I did a presentation in a conference, and it was called The Dark Side. And we dressed up in Star Wars gear and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, all three of you, I've known you for a long time, and all three of you have been very strong mentors to other COCM employees. You not only brought people on, but you saw their success as your success. So with that in mind, the last question is, what advice would you give to a new employee?
So first off, I just want to say one of the other 2 goals in that conference that we had was to promote from within. And that was a really big deal to us. And I'm so happy to say that 20 years later, we've clearly done that. We have somebody who is a student employee who's now a regional director. We have multiple other folks who, a maintenance tech who's now a director at a site. And then, of course, now, 20 years in, most of our senior management started out as directors for us. So we have definitely stayed true to that, one of our core goals, which was to promote from within. So that said, and to your question, Alton, for me, I think be willing to be a part of something bigger than yourself, take the initiative, as well as be willing to do more than what you're expected to do, and look at those other opportunities where you can fill a gap and find your passion. And somewhere in this industry, you can find lots of different ways to find your passion and just go with it.
Well, I hired a lot of new staff members over my time, everywhere from student staff to director staff. And what I would tell the assistant directors and the directors specifically was that when you work with us, you get exposure to things at an earlier part of your career than you ever would if you worked for a college or university. You're not just going to be the residential life side of things, but you'll have exposure to managing multi-million-dollar budgets. You're going to have exposure to some occupancy management strategies. You're going to have exposure to marketing. And I think what a lot of people have realized, and ACOA even has a chief housing officer track to try to get new professionals exposure to these things, is that if you stay in res life only, you don't get that stuff until you're a chief housing officer, and then you're just put in the position and expected to know how to do it. And so I think that we can really be a really good stepping stone for people who need that experience on their resume, and it can really help advance their careers and sometimes even fast track it. And I love when people stay with us for 20 years. It's been great working with people on this call for that length of time, but I also love it when people leave us and go on to do amazing things in the field with the experiences they've got from us.
Well, I certainly can agree with both of those issues. For me, this in August is my 40th year in related to student housing. Half of it was a university administrator and the other half with COCM. But I would suggest that, and I've said this many times, is that this profession finds you, you don't really find it. When I got into the profession, I really did it because it was tuition, an apartment, and a meal plan, so I could go and pursue my educational dreams and my educational or my ultimate profession. And in that, during that period of time and being in housing, it just found me. And I think what I like to say to people is, be flexible, listen to what you're good at, and just do it with a vengeance. Because even if you're not perfect, even if you're not, the highest GPA and all those other things that tend to mark success, what doesn't always appear is one's ability up front to take on a challenge, to go with it, and what 40 years later looks like. And so find out what you're good at and just don't give up and do it with a vengeance. I think that's the advice that we all could benefit from.
Well, I'm going to close with this. I heard recently someone quote Stephen Jobs, and he said, "Only when you look back can you connect the dots." And I would say that you all, this is may sound a little funny, you all are the dots. You are the ones that made COCM what it is today. And, well done for taking COCM and getting it off the ground and getting it to be the leader in the nation in managing student housing. So well done.
I wouldn't want to contradict Jobs for sure, but I would say that we're the connectors as much as we are the dots. And I think one of the things that this team certainly has experienced and demonstrated is their ability to pull people together and their ability to keep their eye on a mission. And, and then just, going after it. And the core, we have a remarkable, we have over 700 employees. We have a remarkable amount of talent that's doing that in another generation right now. And it's connecting the dots and putting the right people in the right places. And it's just moving at an incredibly high speed, which I'm very proud of.
Well, thank you for taking the time to look back. It's been a great conversation and a lot of great stories. Thank you, and all the best to each of you.
Thank you.